All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the newest, latest, maybe greatest episode of How I Met Your Mortgage. As always, I'm your host, Adam Smith, with Just the Tips Coaching. And again, with us pretty much all the time is our marketing director and another one of our coaches, Jen Waybower. Good morning, Jen. And this is definitely an interesting episode for us. We don't do a lot of sequels or continuations. We try to get as many new, fresh guests on the show as we can, but we do have that for you today. We've got a returning guest. Obviously, the world has changed quite a bit since we had Keith Alba on the show. Good morning, Keith.
Hey, good morning.
So this is obviously we're nowhere near the end of what the world is experiencing right now, or the United States or Colorado. And Keith, you are local to Colorado. Let me make sure that our audience knows that as well. But yeah, these are very different times since we had you on the show last. How are you doing?
Yeah, extremely different times. Groundbreaking, completely unique for sure. And I don't know what we've done and what any business needs to do in this changing environment is pivot, make adjustments, and kind of run from there. Real estate is still happening. Transactions are still happening. It's just a matter of, getting in the way of it. So that's where our focus is at the moment.
I think there's some legitimacy to that for sure. Why don't you give us an idea of what that looks like for you?
Well, there's a couple of different avenues. We've got our net cast wide out there and, looking for people that are looking to buy or sell. And then it's just a matter of reaching out and connecting with them, being that real estate resource of choice for them, and kind of helping them along the path, making decisions, and ultimately not necessarily being tied to the outcome.
Okay.
People can... If I have an agenda that I'm pushing, like listing their house or selling it or something along those lines, that can be felt on the other end of the phone. If I'm pushing my agenda, people are going to push back against me. And so it is truly, for me, that resource, that questioning of where you at, what is going on in your world, and how can I be of service? And then from there, just starting those conversations, having the dialogues, and being truly willing to help them where they're at with the needs that they have. So
Yeah, and I would say that so there are both new and old concepts in there. Obviously, when it comes to the old part of it, our clients, our friends, our colleagues, our relatives, 5-year-old children know when we're full of shit. They just do. They know if we're being self-serving, rather than speaking from a position or acting from a position where it's for the greater good of the community. So I do think that that's a really important point, that it's obviously something that people are going to have to make significant adjustments to in their attitude, in their presentation, in who they are right now, because we've all got that radar on. We're all, listening for what is BS. Do we, have a cure? Do we have a home testing kit? Do we have an antidote? Are these masks that I'm seeing 3,000 different ads for on Facebook truly, N95, whatever the case may be. Everybody's bullshit radar is, fine-tuned right now, because obviously the world unfortunately operates in an arena where people are willing to take advantage of people in times like this.
Right.
So yes, I do think being authentic in that sense is really important. But I think that plays true, long before this pandemic, and certainly should play true for everybody afterward. And I would expect that we'll continue to see the people that are successful continue to give from a point of what's for the greater good, and the ones that don't will be the ones that are interested in themselves, frankly.
Yeah, and those that don't, maybe looking for a new career quickly as well. So.
Well, and that's an interesting subject, because there's obviously been a lot of chatter of that, certainly in about our industries. What do you think that looks like from a real estate perspective? Do you think there's a mass exodus of agents? And we already know the stats from NAR basically state that 80% of real estate agents are gone, have failed, are out in the first 2 years. And obviously the turnover is ridiculous. It's like servers at a restaurant kind of thing. But what do you think that means? Is there a significant thinning of the herd, even greater than what we're used to? Does the number of active licensed agents in your market, in your state, come way down from where it was a year ago? 6 months ago?
I do think so, Adam, and I think it's going to be a result of the market that's coming. 30 million unemployed. I saw something this morning that's almost 8% of the mortgages are in some sort of a forbearance. At the moment, these are all people that are saying, hey, listen, I'm having a challenge with paying my mortgage and my commitments at the moment. What's going to change when the economy does open back up? I mean, it's not going to be businesses saying, okay, we can open, everybody, come back and take your jobs back. There's going to be a layering in as revenues start increasing. That's when the businesses are going to be able to bring people back, start hiring them, and start paying salaries and stuff again. But it's not an immediate thing as soon as we say go. And so I do think there's going to be a challenge at the real estate market. We're going to see pressure on prices coming back. We're going to see distressed properties starting to be a part of the Colorado market again. I can't tell you whether or not I think it's going to be a U-shaped recovery or a check mark, but there is going to be a ramping up period to get back to where we were before the whole COVID.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's certainly a different take than some other real estate agents that have been on the show over the last couple of months have given us. But I do want to be fair to everyone who's been on the show and certainly to our audience. We haven't had a whole lot of real estate agents on the show in recent months. There are just so many other people outside of our industries that have got some good feedback, some good content for us to share with the world, that we've had a more diverse guest programming, guest audience. But I think that's probably, I don't want to say the darkest or the bleakest outlook, but maybe the most realistic. And obviously we haven't had this chain of events now nearly 2 months with any other guests that we've had on the show to discuss it with, and certainly not from the specifics of the real estate industry. So yeah, that may very well hold true. We have had a couple of discussions about people not paying their rent. Resulting in investment property owners going into forbearance, people not paying attention to what that mortgage forbearance means, what kind of terms they're looking at, that they may very well have 5 figures, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 worth of payments due in 6 months. And does that result in foreclosures? Does it result in strategic defaults? And do foreclosures in any particular neighborhood? Well, I don't think I need to ask. We know that foreclosures in any particular area have a big impact on housing prices, those kinds of things. So we've kind of been looking at what that chain reaction, those events may look like. But you seem to think that we're going to see a fairly significant shift out of, well, not out of a seller's market, but something that's going to be more favorable for home buyers.
Yeah, I do. And I don't know how deep it's going to go, Adam, but yeah, I do think that there's going to be some pieces there. I think you start looking at, those buyers that bought in the last couple of years that used FHA or VA, right? And they're either a 97.5 or 96.5% loan to value or 100%. And then you factor in the cost of sale that's associated with it. You got real estate commission plus, title insurance and other things that are about it, and say 1 to 2% over the cost of the real estate commissions. Not getting into any price fixing, but let's call it a 7 or 8% cost of sale.
Okay.
For sellers. Well, if you have a 3.5% down payment that you got into the house with, you're already underwater right there. So how many borrowers do you know that are going to be in a situation where they didn't make any money for 3 months because of, this whole COVID thing.
Sure.
And then are going to have extra money to come to the table in order to get out from underneath that obligation that's there. So whenever you start talking about distressed properties, there's a stigma to them. There's, a downward pressure. The market won't pay as much for a distressed property as it will for a, for sale and equity type of a piece. And so there's definitely, I see, some downward pressure on pricing that's there. And I think some people, especially ones that got into the house recently, are going to potentially be the biggest victims, looking for a short sale, or as you mentioned, a strategic default just to get out from underneath it.
All right, so, and I know the focus of the show here, for those of you watching, isn't always for us to just discuss the real estate market, and I apologize, but there is some fascinating content in here. Keith, that makes me think that you believe we're going to start to see things like short sales and foreclosures, and obviously it's not something we've addressed in years and years with what the real estate values have been doing. No bank would agree to sell short because the house is going to sell for more than is owed on it with all the appreciation that we've gained in recent years. And foreclosures also, there's no reason to get foreclosed on when you could sell your property, pocket a bunch of cash, preserve your credit, so on and so forth. So you think this is going to have a fairly significant impact in months to come?
I do. I'm going to say impact. I don't know if it's significant impact that's going to be a part of it. We're still seeing properties, multiple offers in the first weekends, depending on the price points, depending on how the quality of the house, how it's, the condition of it, all that kind of stuff. That's, I think, a little bit of a built up, pent up buyer demand. And then once we work through that, it's where we'll start seeing some of this distressed properties coming to forbearance and coming to the market that's out there. So
that it makes a lot of sense. It does.
There will be some in the Denver market. I just don't know how big it's going to be, but yeah, I don't see a way where there can't. We're coming from almost next to nothing in regards to distressed properties, and having this kind of an impact on the economy is going to have an impact on distressed properties in the future. I just don't see a way around it.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. If we're looking at high loan-to-value ratio financing, FHA, VA, Home Possible, some of these conventional 3%, 5% down products, and these are people who bought late last year, early this year, then we're out of work. We see an impact to the real estate values, albeit negligible. A 3% impact isn't that big. And now all of a sudden they owe what the house is worth, or maybe even they owe a little more than the house is worth. They're out of work for a number of months. It's going to take a number of months beyond that to financially recover from it. There's a lot of logic. If we look at it A to B in a real linear perspective, I think you're right. I think that there's going to be a greater impact than Jen or I or any of our previous guests had accounted for. Thank you.
I just don't know, and we'll see different areas of the country get hit harder than some. Because of the market and what we have in the Denver metro area. I think there's a little bit of insulation compared to, some of the other places that may have already been starting to see a little bit of that softening prior to going into this crisis. But I think there'll be opportunities out there. If you're a real estate agent and you have some old asset manager friends, it's time to dust off that contact information and start reaching out to them.
All right, so that's one good tip, and let's kind of circle back to what our normal content would be anyway. Give us some idea, and I know you've been under the weather and that you were fairly sick, not COVID-19, but still during this last couple of months. What kind of changes are you making now to that, lead gen type of activity? And like you just mentioned, what kinds of things should agents, mortgage originators, other direct-to-consumer salespeople be doing in the next coming months, like dusting off some of those relationships? Oh, and actually, Paul just commented that he's not seeing anything like that in Colorado Springs yet. Still seeing multiple offers, still getting 3 to 5% over asking. Paul, thank you for the feedback. Keith, go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that we've done on the team, Adam, is a mind shift and a semantic sort of a thing. We're no longer doing lead generation calls. We've switched our semantics now to love generation calls. So when we're calling into our database, it's about putting our arms around them, reaching and meeting them where they're at that moment, and what is it that they need, right? And then being that resource and saying, okay, let me help you out. Even if it is would say it's a landscaping issue. They're looking for a certain plant or something for part of their COVID-19, honeydew list. And, reaching out to the database to try and help them find that. Just being that resource. And with some of the people, quite honestly, it's just having a conversation. They're so starved for interaction with people. Just having a dialogue and a nice conversation with somebody is what they need at that moment, and they're grateful for it. And so that's where a lot of our efforts are spent right now, is just digging into that database, reaching out to our people, wrapping our arms around them, and seeing, what we can do to be of service to them. And if it's just an ear, then we spend 30 minutes on the phone with them, just, listening. So.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true through our phone contact management these days at the mortgage company as well. Had a 30-minute conversation with a friend in the Vail Valley this morning, talked about their recent moves, some mortgage stuff, the kids, what they're dealing with, and yeah, what the world looks like today, what it's going to look like when we return to whatever the new normal is. And yeah, it was clear it was just a need for the two of us to reconnect and have a conversation that was deeper and more meaningful than usual. Hey, this is what your rate's going to be, or hey, this is, what we're going to make an offer on, or those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of us are longing, if not starved, for that human interaction right now. We're missing all our nouns. I saw my wife post this: people, places, and things. We're missing nouns. So yeah, it's good to certainly connect with the ones that you can, which right now is going to be the people.
Yeah, and especially those that are by themselves, right? That maybe isolating in isolation. That's got to be tough.
I can't imagine. I'm very fortunate that way. My whole family is in the house right now. Obviously, we're still spending a little bit of time in the office, so I do get to see my coworkers from time to time. My grandmother has been locked in her retirement home apartment. It's not awful. It's a 2-bedroom apartment, but for 2 months, I mean, literally, what's probably about 8 weeks, she has not even been allowed to set foot in the hallway outside of her apartment, and by herself, and I just cannot imagine how she's able to hold it together as well as she has. It must be brutal for those experiencing it that way.
It's crazy. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about my challenges with health, but I did get admitted into the hospital at one point during that, and they thought it was COVID. My symptoms were all COVID related. We were waiting for the test to come back, but like literally they put me in a room and they'd come in and gear up and all their PPE and have, this distance between them. At one point I asked for some water and some ice. My cup was full. I went to hand it to the nurse and she said, "Oh, I can't touch that. I can't take it out of this room, but I'll bring in ice and water for you to refill that," sort of piece.
Right.
So, I mean, the degree to the separation that they're putting out there adds to that isolation. I can't even imagine living like that for 8 weeks like grandma there.
Well, and these healthcare providers, I mean, their life's mission is to connect and to help and to heal and to be that voice of reason. And, they can't. They're literally not even allowed to do that right now. It's strictly about life-saving measures, and it has to end there. Literally just in the interest of preventing the spread. So, yeah, I'm sure the psychological toll on so many people right now is obviously dramatic.
I was in there for 3 days, and ready to bust out of the seams as soon as I could. So.
Yeah, and nobody visiting with you, including healthcare providers, except when they can take those moments to tend to your needs, your physical needs, and no more. Right.
It's completely impersonal, right? Because they've got their N95 mask on, and then they've got the face shield, and they've got, multiple layers of protective equipment on top of it all. It's tough to hear them. It's tough to really get a lot of that body language and a lot of communication that comes through because they're so covered in protective equipment that's there. That it's crazy. I feel bad for the healthcare workers. I'm grateful for the efforts that's there, and for the people that are fighting this by themselves for longer periods of time. man, the mental health challenge has got to be struggle.
Oh, monstrous! And we're starting to see some of that. Obviously, I don't want to dwell on it, but we see suicide rates are up, and psychological issues that the healthcare providers are having are way up, and so on and so forth. But let's move on to slightly rosier times. As we start to, and we are flattening the curve. All of you who are staying home, that are washing your hands, going out in masks, whatever the case may be, where you're following that community continuity and certainly helping to do what we can to make sure that we don't overwhelm the healthcare system, so that when the people who do need life-saving measures, like Keith being in the hospital, can get that attention, they're getting it. So kudos to all of you, our entire country, the entire global community that's helping with that. And as we're succeeding in that, we're starting to see things reopen. A little bit in Colorado. Certainly more, maybe even more than I would be comfortable with in other places. Jen had mentioned a restaurant in her home state of Maine trying to violate the law and reopen, and losing their permits and licenses to even conduct their normal business when they're allowed. But months from now, 2, 3, 6, 12, what do you think changes in your business? How do you relate differently to people? How do you relate differently to the physical nature, to being in houses, to combing around for items with an inspector? What do you think is different in your business in September? Maybe in January, those kinds of things.
Well, I think and depending on the county that you're operating in, there's different rules right now even, but prior to the safer at home order that Polis has issued, back when we were under the stay at home orders, we were forced to get a little bit creative in order to continue to sell real estate and market it out there. And so I think some of those aspects will maintain within the real estate business. So I can foresee buyers getting more, I guess, eliminating more properties prior to actually physically going out and setting up showings. They're going to be using a lot more of the technology with the virtual walkthroughs and open houses and things along those lines. I think that'll stick around. And so they'll be able to watch some of those videos and check things out and ultimately eliminate some of the properties from their interest list moving forward. So I think some of the technology changes that we put in place now will stick around. It'll help with our efficiencies as real estate agents. That's there. And I think, some of the things like the virtual closings or the virtual notaries been something that's been needed for a long period of time. And it was this crisis that kind of forced the hand of the government to allow those. So I think we'll see that become more streamlined and implemented into the business. So
yeah, you're preaching to the choir on that subject. I don't know how many years we've talked about it. I don't know that most of the American real estate community realizes how fortunate the Colorado real estate community has it with the CTME system. It is, light years ahead of a lot of what goes on in the country, obviously. But yes, there's no question, and I'll take, full responsibility. A lot of what goes on with the lack of ability to technologically advance in the entire real estate transaction process is on us. We've never had we haven't had an electronic system since, even before the Great Recession. The MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, caused so many problems during the recession that we've obviously still been very, very adamant about having wet signatures on everything. So yes, that we may very well be forcing a technological hand in the mortgage industry to spur that forward. We're ecstatic, I promise. I hate that it's a pandemic that brought it on, but it was a long time coming.
Yeah. And one that I'm happy to see. It's for the better, for sure.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
And what about, I don't want to, I don't want to categorize this improperly, but what about the consumer, the home owner, the home buyer, the home seller? how do you think they react to the future of strangers being in our home and open houses and showings and going out into strange homes and looking at them? What do you think the consumer mindset is going forward?
Yeah, I think it's going to be similar to kind of what we were just talking about, where they're going to want to see what technology they can do to limit that exposure or that interaction that's out there. But in my experience, Adam, most of the consumers that are out there, they don't have the ability to say take a rendering of a floor plan and translate that into a 3D feel of the house, right? For the properties that are most interesting to the buyers, I think there's still going to be a requirement for them to get into the property, to get a feel, quote unquote, for the size of the rooms, or how the bed feels in that room. If king is too large and overtakes the space, or can they get away with the queen sort of a piece? And so it's a very touch and feel kind of purchase for people. One, because of the dollar amounts of it, and two, because of the personal side of it. So I still think it's going to be a necessary evil to have open houses, to have strangers kind of traipsing through the house at some point. I guess the good news for sellers in the future is going to be that the people that are coming through are hopefully going to be more serious about being an actual buyer rather than tire kickers and just kind of checking something out because it met their general criteria and was in their price point.
Well, that bodes well for both sellers and for real estate agents.
Timing wise, for sure, yeah. Less demand on
and it's certainly what's going on right now. If people are selling and buying right now, they're serious. They need to buy and sell. Otherwise, you wouldn't put up with that nonsense during what the rest of us are talking about. So, and Paul, thank you again for your comments. No more food at open houses. That's probably a good idea. I would agree. Let's be as hands-off as we can. But Paul does kind of bring up an interesting topic in a previous comment. And I know there's some humor to it. There's some comedy to it. And I did, in fact, see that a meme, for example, that the two people that will really be successful when all of this is lifted will be the divorce attorneys and the barbers. But Paul makes a good point that divorce rates are going to go up, and that may very well be true. I think that there's some legitimacy to that. Although, if we're having the economic impact that we are experiencing, or think we will be going down this road, people don't get divorced as much in poor economic times. They don't think they can afford it. But Keith, do you think an increase in people spending time at home leads to an increased divorce rate, leads to an increase in listings?
Yeah, I think the way I would say it, Adam, more is that there will be a lot of life changes that people come out of this, whether it's a divorce because they realized they were sheltering in place with the wrong individual, or there may be a spike in population, come 9 months down the road as well. So there may be, a need for move-up buyers looking for a bigger house because, now they got a new bundle of joy on the way.
That's good.
What else do you do when you're stuck at home with your wife?
Well, apparently you may be fighting, which would lead to divorce. And I'm sure my wife is watching, so I want to say that's not the case. And I absolutely picked the right person 20 years ago to shelter in place with. So, just get me off the hook there a little bit. But yeah, I agree. I think that there will be a lot of life changes that way. People who, boy, if we only had a swimming pool during this shelter in place order, boy, that would have been life changing. Or if we lived on open space and we could walk right out onto the path and go hike for miles at a time. Or maybe living
the yard for recess is too small. And I need to send the homeschool kids out to get away from me for a little while. Something along those lines. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So, Keith, as always, our 30-minute episode has blown by in the what feels like it's been about 3 minutes. We love having you as a guest, and I'm sure we'll have you back again next year. Hopefully you'll be feeling better by then.
Yeah, right.
No question. So for those of you that were watching live, or those of you watching in syndication, thank you so much. Or for those of you listening to the podcast, again, thank you so much for that participation. And as always, give us some idea of how to reach out to you, Keith. There's obviously a lot of good content here. It wouldn't surprise me if people want to talk to you further.
Sure. Email is real creative and unusual. It's keithalba@kw.com. So KEITHALBA at KW as in KellerWilliams.com. And my cell phone is 303-478-7246. Feel free to reach out. Happy to have more conversations with anybody about any of the things we talked about here.
Excellent. And what about you, Jen? How are you managing this last? I mean, it hasn't been that long since I've seen you, but and we see each other a lot this way. But anything that we're missing with big changes that are going to be a result of shelter in place for a couple of months, or what could be longer?
Well, I think Keith touched on a really important point at the very beginning of all this, talking about how your goal at the end of these conversations with your clients can't be to sell them. And that's important all the time. That's something we always talk about with JTT is stop trying to sell everyone, form relationships, form real relationships. And I think that's going to be even more important right now, but in the next 6 months, the next year, we really have no idea. But I think this is an opportunity for salespeople in general to really hone in on those skills of forming relationships and stop trying to make the sale, because that's not really your job in the end of the day.
Oh, sure.
Lead generation is your job.
And I will remember the people that were authentic, compassionate, concerned, caring over the last few months